Alright, today I just wanted to start section 4 about the powers of Congress. Congress has three basic, specific, broad powers. The express powers, the implied powers, the non-legislative powers. Today what we're going to start talking about are the express powers of Congress. The express powers of Congress can be found explicitly in the Constitution, more specifically under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Under this component of the Constitution, it lists Congress 18 specific powers. This was done in the spirit or the idea of limited government, meaning that the framers did not want the government to have too much power, so they tried to limit it by saying, hey, these are the powers that you have. What we're going to see over time is that Congress has taken these 18 powers and they've used them to start to slowly expand upon their power. One of the best examples of this is the Commerce Clause. If we take a look at the Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it'll say Congress has the power to regulate all interstate commerce as well as commerce between states and other nations. But if we look at the examples on the slide here, what we have seen is Congress has been able to slowly expand their powers through the Commerce Clause, through regulating channels of commerce, regulating the instrumentalities of Congress, and also, thirdly, if we look at, say, New Deal legislation, civil rights legislation, Congress has used the Commerce Clause to regulate activities that have a substantial effect on interstate commerce as well. In addition, another important power Congress has is what is called their power of the purse. The power of the purse you want to think about, Congress has the power to appropriate or allot how a government will not only raise but also how they will spend their money. Most of this legislation comes right out of the House of Representatives. It's a part of our Constitution that says all legislation dealing with appropriations must come from the House. But in their power of the purse, Congress works with the President to develop a budget to determine how a country will both raise money and where and how it will be spent. Finally, the last express power we want to talk about is Congress's power over both foreign affairs and military. And the biggest one is that Congress plays a key role in foreign policy because it can obviously declare war, but it can also raise armies, decide how it will raise armies, legislate the draft, determine how much money will go to defense spending of those natures. But let's take a look at a specific example. If you look at the Constitution, it says only Congress has the right to declare war. But what we have seen is since World War II, we've not had an official declaration of war. So what we see in 1972, Congress passes something called the War Powers Resolution Act. What this did is it limited the president's power to make undeclared war. Think of military action in Korea, Vietnam, for example, which basically just said, hey, the president can use the military however they want. They just have to, one, inform Congress and also get their approval. The question behind a lot of these express powers, for example, like the Commerce Clause, how can Congress say that they can prevent racial discrimination, or passing laws to prevent racial discrimination is an example of the Commerce Clause. A lot of the justification that is used actually comes from Congress's implied powers, more specifically the Necessary and Proper Clause or the Elastic Clause. Think back to when we were talking about the various powers of the government, and I use that example, that rubber band. We look at a rubber band, it's kind of small. But when we stretch out that rubber band, it can go around things that are bigger. The Necessary and Proper Clause is the same idea. If we think about the express powers of Congress, we can think of a small rubber band. But what Congress has done is through the Elastic Clause, through the Necessary and Proper Clause, they have expanded those powers by giving flesh, talking about, how do we raise an army? How can we use the Commerce Clause? How can we use these powers given to us by the framers to effectively do our job? Now, with the Elastic Clause, because there is a source of debate, because of the fact that these are implied powers, meaning it's left up to the interpretation of judges in our Supreme Court. There is still debate about whether or not Congress has overstretched their bounds. I think we can look at, for example, the debates now over the Affordable Care Act. A lot of the debates, a lot of the arguments center around the Affordable Care Act is, does Congress have the authority to mandate that we all have health care? Do they have the ability to have this tax? And some of these issues where the Congress who passed it will say, hey, yeah, we have we can make use of the necessary and proper clause. They've used the Commerce Clause as justification in some of the Supreme Court rulings. Tomorrow I want to look at the non-legislative powers and also look at the things that you guys did, your research on the various committees. Thanks a lot.